This is KM Wyland, and you are listening to the 382nd episode of the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. This week I finished my quote-unquote research, which consisted solely of reading Dreamlander, the first book in my projected Portal Fantasy trilogy. I read through it to help me maintain continuity as I get ready to dive into the first draft of its sequel, Dreambreaker. So I was highlighting everything that had to do with setting and character descriptions, favored words and vocabulary tics of certain characters, and any little tidbits that could be sewn back in as foreshadowing in the subsequent stories. I ended up with over 500 highlights and notes. By the time I reached the end, my Kindle was not very happy with me and was taking about 3 seconds just to turn the page. It also meant I had to spend several hours collecting and categorizing my highlights. I still have to organize them into topic-titled folders within Scrivener, but hopefully it will help me avoid any big continuity errors going forward. The latest post on my blog is 3 tips to choose the right protagonist. Choose the right protagonist by first using these 3 tips to make him the single most interesting person in your entire story. To read the post, visit helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And now I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast entitled, How to Make Sure Your Story Has Emotional Stakes. You can do almost everything right in a story and it will not matter. Acing your story structure, constructing a solid thematic premise, and punching your card on every important character arc beat will not matter if you don't also nail the emotional stakes. The craft of storytelling is largely logical. We study story theory to discover the patterns that emerge from story to story, and then apply these universal facets of structure to our own stories. But as important as logic is to good writing, it can never bear the burden of good storytelling all by itself. Emotion is every bit as important, arguably more so, in getting readers to actually care about and invest in the logically compelling story world you've created. That's where emotional stakes come in. It's the glue that holds together your plot, character, and theme. It's what takes your story from solid but empty framework to the realm of something readers will enjoy, remember, and perhaps even be impacted by. Fail in your emotional stakes, and your entire story, however great its structure or character arc, simply will not matter. Unfortunately, that's the category in which we find the highly anticipated entry of Doctor Strange into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Welcome to the latest installment in our serial exploration of the good and the bad in the Marvel movies. I missed Doctor Strange in the theater last summer, which meant, no doubt, I missed out on a little bit of the dazzle from its gorgeous special effects. At the end of its 2 hours, however, I wasn't too bummed to have saved an extra $10 on ticket fare. But first, the good things. I found Doctor Strange a very solid story. Its structure is nicely in place, and it offers a lovely and sound character arc as supremely arrogant neurosurgeon Stephen Strange gets hit in the head, or hands, by life and is forced to rethink his assumptions about himself and the universe. The whole kaleidoscopic special effect approach is lovely. The ladies, in my opinion, stole the show with Tilda Swinton using her eerie charm to excellent effect here, and Rachel McAdams breathing much-needed warmth and life into her every scene. The antagonist, Caecilius, however abbreviated his screen time, at least got the opportunity to offer some legitimate-sounding reasons for his plan to give everyone immortality. And then, of course, there was Thor's tea. And now, the not-so-good things. So much information dumping. One of the challenges of any origin story is setting up the world, and in this instance, its magic system for viewers. The best stories make the training sessions a legitimately interesting part of the conflict, and also preferably leave viewers with a clear and sensible understanding of how the rules work in this world and why they matter. Here, not so much. Now, gotta love Benedict Cumberbatch, even though it was very strange hearing him with an American accent. But more than anything, this latest iteration of a Marvel jerk made me appreciate Robert Downey Jr.'s insane charm, which gave us a much more endearing, rich, arrogant, talented hero than we get from Stephen Strange, who pretty much just is a jerk in the beginning. As is also often a pitfall of origin stories, the overarching conflict with the main antagonist, Caecilius, feels tacked on. Stephen has no personal investment in fighting Caecilius. At one point, he basically stops and says, "Why am I fighting this guy? I don't even know who he is." To which everybody indignantly responds, "Dude, because he's evil." Still, all of those are pretty minor complaints. So it took me a while to puzzle out why this movie just didn't work for me. Why it never sucked me in. Why, to be honest, it kind of bored me. And then, light bulb, this story has no prominent relationship character, and as a result, no emotional stakes. Now, first things first, what are emotional stakes? Simply put, emotional stakes get your readers to care about your story. Emotional stakes get readers emotionally involved. When you succeed in building strong emotional stakes, readers essentially merge with your story. You've pulled them in so deeply that their critical, logical brain tones down a little. Maybe they even completely block out the physical world around them. For writers, this is the ultimate goal. This is, to us, what those pesky Infinity Stones are to Thanos. When your story engages readers on an emotional level, you've got them. Cha-ching. Fail, however, in the emotional stakes department, and two things happen. One, at best, readers will simply skim the story's surface, never really engaging with it, and ultimately setting it aside and forgetting about it. Two, at worst, the lack of emotional engagement will send readers into logical overdrive. And that means they're going to be far too aware of your story at every step. They're standing outside the story, failing to fully suspend disbelief, and therefore are viewing it critically, sometimes very, very critically. Okay, so these emotional stakes don't sound so hard. Just write a reasonably likable character, throw him into a hairy situation, and poof! Readers, well, care about him, become so emotionally involved they forget to eat or drink for the next 12 hours, and then awake from their trance thinking that was the best book ever. Easy, right? I wish. All of that is a good starting place, but as Doctor Strange shows us, getting all the foundational pieces of a story right isn't enough to punch readers' emotional buttons. Fortunately, just because we're talking emotion doesn't mean we can't apply ourselves logically to figure out what pieces must be in play to hit just the right switches. As a matter of fact, there are 3 particular tests you can run to determine if your story will succeed or fail in engaging readers emotionally. Test number 1. Does your story feature important relationship characters? This is where emotional stakes start. We understand people through their interactions with other people. Characters show us who they really are, both contextually and subtextually, in their relationships with other characters. Even a story such as Castaway, about a man marooned on an island, becomes emotional through the already established relationships he's trying to get back to, and the relationships he projects on inanimate objects, such as, say, a soccer ball. The most interesting part of any story is always the interplay between two people. Whether they're talking to each other, looking at each other, getting physical in some way, or studiously avoiding any of the above. You don't, however, get emotional stakes simply by putting 2 characters in a room together. You also don't get a relationship character simply by having 2 characters slap backs and call each other buddy. A relationship character is a very specific entity within a story form. This is a prominent relationship that strategically impacts the protagonist's personal journey by pushing him toward either the truth or lie, and or evolves in direct proportion as both an effect and a visual representation of the protagonist's inner transformation. The relationship character can be one or more of any prominent archetypal characters, including antagonist, mentor, sidekick, and love interest. What's important about this character or characters is that she is not just a fluffy add-on for the sake of some cute dialogue. No, she's absolutely, definitively, 100% integral to the story's thematic premise. And this is where Doctor Strange makes its first misstep with its emotional stakes. Despite a multitude of opportunities, it fails to produce even one solid relationship character. Now, granted, the archetypes are largely present. We have the mentor. The Ancient One impacts Stephen's arc the most, probably has more screen time than any other minor character, and is, for my money, the most interesting character in the story. But with the exception of her death scene, she fails to engage with Stephen on a deeper level. Mostly she serves to simply spew important information. We also have the love interest. Dr. Christine Palmer is a great character, and Rachel McAdams' warm performance pops her off the screen in her every scene. Of all the minor characters, she brings the most in emotional stakes, as we understand Stephen's ability to emotionally relate to her will both prove his inner transformation and determine the happiness of his future. Christine's presence at least pays tribute to the need for a relationship character. Sadly, she's present in the movie for a bare fraction of the running time and has little impact on the actual plot. Then we have the antagonist. Marvel, in general, is a great example of the fact that the best conflicts are those that result when the antagonist is a formative, even the formative, relationship character. The series also shows us that when the antagonist is not a relationship character, he inevitably seems tacked on. Stephen and Caecilius have no personal relationship whatsoever, which means the main conflict is actually ancillary to Stephen's personal journey, which we'll talk about in Test 3 in a minute. And then there's the sidekick. Finally, we have a sadly underused Mordo. In light of his role as an antagonist in future stories, his early friendship with Stephen was the perfect setup for an excellent and meaningful relationship. Regrettably, Mordo remains arguably the flattest character of the lot. His relationship with Stephen is barely that of a friend, if only because it is never developed. In the end, this makes his defection far less meaningful than it could have been. Test number 2. Does your story feature pertinent interpersonal conflict? Once you've set up your story's primary relationship characters, you then get to actually use these relationships in a way that creates conflict and interest. When you hear a relationship character, you might think nice, happy, healthy friendship. But I say, oh, no, you don't. Once you've got a relationship character, the only way to get emotional stakes is to milk that relationship for all it's worth. The stakes arise when the relationship and its positive outcome are important, even crucial, to the protagonist's personal development, and yet that outcome is in serious doubt. Whether friends or foes, both of the characters in this relationship must be complex personalities, struggling through lies and truths, causing problems for themselves and each other, and ultimately making the path to true love or whatever anything but smooth. Remember, in so many ways, this relationship is the story. If I had to pick one single reason why Doctor Strange bored me, this is it. Its lack of prominent relationship characters and an overemphasis on sharing its complicated magic system and backstory snowballed into an utter lack of interpersonal conflict. Stephen engages with a lot of conflict in trying to overcome his injuries from the car wreck, and then still more as he runs through dimensions, trying first to avoid dying at Caecilius' hands, and then trying to stop Caecilius' evil plans. But he engages in basically zero interpersonal conflict. Yes, all of the previously mentioned potential relationship characters take a turn hollering at him for something, but save for an early argument with Christine, none of these scenes do anything to advance the actual relationships themselves. Thus, the relationships are never at risk of either crumbling or growing, thus no emotional stakes, thus snore. Now, if you want an example of what good interpersonal conflict with a relationship character looks like, look no farther than The Avengers, Captain America Winter Soldier, and especially Captain America Civil War. Test number 3. Have you tied your emotional stakes to the plot stakes? Okay, so here you are. You've got some great relationship characters causing some great interpersonal conflict, which is in turn creating juicy emotional stakes. But have you made sure those emotional stakes are integral to the overarching main conflict of the exterior plot? In a truly great story, everything comes together seamlessly. Every piece is part of the larger whole. Plot, character, and theme all move in such a way that they affect each other in a symbiotic circle of cause and effect. Subplots all come together in the end, preferably to move the main plot, but at least as a symbolic representation of some aspect of the theme. The easiest way to pull this off is to make sure the principal relationship character is the antagonist. This means, in essence, that the main conflict is your emotional stakes. Not all stories will support this, which is fine, as long as the conflict with the main relationship character and its related emotional stakes either directly influence the events in the climactic moment or are the focus of the conflict resolution in the climactic moment. And yes, Doctor Strange belly flopped on this one too. As we've already touched on, the exterior conflict with Caecilius and his world-ending plan were decidedly, even egregiously, distanced from Stephen's personal journey. Now, to be fair, I'm not going to hold the film's feet to the fire on this one, since more than one Marvel movie has been guilty of this. But the bad news here is that the complete lack of any juicy subplot conflict means Doctor Strange doesn't do too much to distract us from this particular problem. The result is a climactic battle that lacks any kind of emotional stakes. Yes, Stephen completes his positive change arc with a nice moment of self-sacrifice, but the conflict itself gives us no reason to care on a personal level whether he defeats Caecilius or parts ways with Mordor. And since his ability to win the conflict was never in any doubt, this means the climax, which should be the tensest and most exciting part of the story, was one of the most forgettable. Simply put, if a story fails to engage, then it fails. Fortunately, that doesn't have to be a criticism made of your story. Make sure your story passes these 3 important tests for acing its emotional stakes, and you'll never have any problem getting readers to suspend disbelief. Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, you can visit my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And be sure to check back again next week.